everybody. My name is Jacob Cates. I'm joined here again with Aaron. We are researchers for the ALLFED organization, the Alliance to Feed Earth in Disasters. Today we want to go over our findings on scaling up industrial food production in a nuclear winter scenario. So to give you some background on ALLFED, ALLFED is trying to put academia into practice, focusing on feeding people during a global catastrophe. So our work here is built upon that, done by Dr. David Denkenberger and Joshua Pierce in their book, Feeding Everyone, No Matter What. In this book, they explore different options for feeding people with alternative foods in a variety of global catastrophes. ALLFED is expanding, so we have people from all around the world, and we're trying to grow to expand further research into these different alternative foods. Today, we're focusing in on one alternative food, that being cellulosic sugar. So we take leftover plant material, like corn stover, take it to a facility where it gets broken down so that we can extract the glucose. Some other alternative foods that were looked at in the book include single-cell proteins, mushrooms and fungus, leaves, and many more. The different catastrophes that were also looked at in the book are range from smaller orders of magnitude, more local catastrophes, to larger orders of magnitude catastrophes. One we're looking at today being global nuclear war, where nearly 100% of global food loss is affected. In a global nuclear war between the United States and Russia, there's going to be targeted cities that have a chance of where we would lose the industry that we could use to produce the cellulosic sugar. The cause of the winter itself would be from these explosions throwing soot up into the atmosphere. There's a chance that this soot would linger for many years over the Earth. This would be blocking out the sunlight, so you would have reduced global temperatures, and you would also have, since the sunlight is being blocked, the plant growth would be declined, so we would have obviously a great impact on our food production there. There's going to be, initially from the attacks, loss in population. The bigger loss in population, though, be resulting from the famine if a nuclear winter occurred. There's many variables that go into the global war scenario, so there's a lot of debate over how to actually model and simulate this. So what we did for our project is try and simplify it down with different assumptions. Our first assumption being the lost infrastructure from the targeted cities. Any industry that we could have used, that would be the industry used for the population loss. So there's like a canceling out there. Our second assumption is that the remaining industry and infrastructure that survives the nuclear war, it would be mandated by any remaining organizations, governments, that these facilities be used and retrofitted, so we would turn them into cellulosic sugar facilities. Finally, our last assumption is that there's a 4-month organization time. So the period before construction begins, where we are doing design work and preparation, we assume that we could have a 4-month period for this, similar to the United States during World War II when they were retrofitting automobile plants for airplane production and armaments. This was about a 5-month period for that. So we see that as being comparable in this situation. In any of the global catastrophe scenarios, there's one question that we are trying to answer.
Thank you, Jacob, very much. So the key question we are trying to answer is, how quickly can we scale up industrial food production? And there's a subset of question in there. So, for example, what kind of foods can be scaled without the sun? That's a crucial point. How quickly can we do this? Because there's only a certain time window before global food storage runs out and where we would start to starve. And the third one is, how much will it cost and how much will we be able to produce? And I just want to give one quick warning. There have been some speaker changes in the last minute, and this is actually an older slide. You will find spelling mistakes. I'm very sorry, but everything on the content side is correct. So what you're looking at is a very busy graph out of the book, Feeding Everyone No Matter What, from 2014, from Professor David Denkenberger. And it was an order of magnitude estimate of different alternative food sources and how quickly we could ramp them up to be a part of global food demands. And it's very busy, and I would just want to focus your attention on a few lines. The first one being the red line that's quickly declining. after a certain amount of time. That's our worst case scenario. That is if we are not able to scale up alternative food sources. That is our stored edible food. And there you can see that roughly after 2/3 of a year, the major proportion of the population will face hunger and starve to death. So, but there have been some promising estimates regarding industrial foods. One of those being single-cell protein derived from methane or natural gas. There are chemical processes that turn these natural gases into protein, or that another industrial process being taking biomass like leaves or agriculture residues and turning them into sugar. And you can see that's a bright green line scaling up. I hope you can see it. And the estimate was that we would be able to feed everyone with these kind of food sources in about 1 year. And that was 2014, and we dived deeper into the research. And to quickly give you an overview over the process, this is an already economically achieved process that's already implemented, and we are taking agricultural leftovers or, for example, timber. So there's plenty of biomass for this process to work with. And in a chemical process, that gets turned into a sugar. Comet Bio is a industry you can see on this graph, has patented one of these processes and is working with this on an economical scale. Yes, and in the end, the output is human edible food, in this case, sugar. And we did different kind of construction methods we approached to see, to answer these questions, how quickly and how many people we would be able to feed this way. So first of all, we looked at a reference plant and just looked, okay, how many of these plants would we be able to construct today with our potential we have today with no changes, no acceleration. Second one being fast construction, where we looked into overmanning, overtiming, or shift work, 24/7 work. And the last step was us looking into retrofitting of industries, where we looked into the flowcharts of several other facilities that, for example, worked with biomasses, for example, biofuel refineries, breweries, or pulp and paper industries. And there we compared the component lists to see how quickly we can retrofit them and what would be needed. And we did a net present value analysis of these kind of sugars that would be produced from these different endeavors to see how much they would cost, because that is an important indicator of how much work is needed and how many people we would be able to feed and how many people would be able to afford it. And we can see it's a rough $2 a kilogram, which is roughly an order of magnitude more expensive than today. So this fast construction will increase food prices, but it's still at a price range where it's affordable to the most people. And just to give you a rule of thumb, you need about half a kilogram of dry plant matter or biomass to survive a day. So, and the most promising result was that pulp and paper industries, to retrofit them, was very promising. More, you will see more in the later slides, because these industries already work with timber and other biomasses and have most of the components already in place. So let's look at just our today's budget and see how many of these facilities we could build. So you're seeing the budget of $450 billion. That is today the global amount of money that's being spent on new chemical infrastructure. We thought this is a very good indicator to see how much manpower and industry we have to actually produce new facilities, and choose that as our budget. This wasn't taken without a hurry, and this budget allows us to build around 1,500 plants at a time. And there's going to be a break-in period after they are finished. That's why you will see these staircases. But to explain that graph real quick, there's about a 1 year time right now to design these plants, and it will take about 1.5 years to construct these. That's why you will see the first sugar production around 2.5 years in. And you will see a first stair step and then another one, because as a lot of project managers will maybe confirm, the first time you turn it on, it won't run smoothly. So we are assuming a 50% potential of the capacity being reached on average in the first period of time until these plants reach their full potential. And there you can see that after roughly 3 years, we would be able to cover 20% of the global food demands. And then we have a plateau where the next construction phases, and it continues. Well, let's see how this compares to other fast construction methods. So we are still working with the same budget, but now we are looking at 24/7 shift work and construction, which has been the most promising in comparison to overmanning and overtime work. And we cut down the design time and the setup time to only 4 months. That is because there has been a historic example that has been in the USA, that was in World War II, the retrofitting of automobile infrastructure or facilities to produce plane engines and other war machines. And they were able to do this in only 5 months. So that made us believe that it's feasible to scale this time down to only 4 months. And because of the 24/7 construction time, this also reduces our construction time to around 24 weeks. And we can see that the first sugar being produced starts only already at about 1 year in comparison to the 2.5 years before. And it will grow gradually. And in the end, because we are limited by budget, doing stuff fast costs more, it will be overtaken by the normal construction method. And the last construction method that we looked into was the retrofitting of already existing industries. And one assumption we already was also mentioned by Jacob, that it's going to be mandatory, so we are looking at all the industries and we assume they will be retrofitted. And the most promising one was pulp and paper. The big 2 steps you can see that will get us to around feeding 20% or meeting 20% of the global food demands after only 1 year. That's basically retrofitting all the pulp and paper factories there are in the world. And from then on, the slower increase is because we are looking at less promising but still promising industries to retrofit. And after roughly 4 years, we will plateau at around 40% of global food demands, since all industries we looked at have been retrofitted to produce the cellulosic sugar. And now, to summarize this, there are some key insights. So we will be able, after 1 year, to meet 20%, realistically speaking, of global food demands if we stick to the budget of all the new chemical infrastructure. Not the order of magnitude estimate that was there in the book, so this is an important update, but also there might be way up if we are looking at the global budget in general in machining industries, for example. There. And the other key insight is that nations today, if they want to prepare or want to act, should prioritize pulp and paper factories, and there should also be preparedness plans in that regard. And we did one reality check. So what we are proposing here is that the sugar production globally should increase in 1 year by 2.1 to 2.7, 2.7 folds. And the retrofitting that took place in World War II was an increase in war machinery output of about 2.4 in just 5 months, or 6 months in this case. So that gives us a good historic example that this retrofitting is realistically achievable. And the last point being, cellulosic sugar is affordable, which is the key point in saving millions. And therefore, I want to thank you very much for your attention. And there will be, just want to give you a few more informations. If you want to get involved, please visit our website, allfed.info. Or if you want to get involved yourselves, there on effectivethesis.com, there are a lot of, which is also an EA project, there are a lot of different projects where you can start researching yourself or help us with. And there's this book I've mentioned, and I will now give a little handout if you're interested, where you can sign up with your email. And I want to thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks for the talk, guys. Really interesting. I've got a couple specific questions on the cellulosic sugar proposal, and then maybe a couple broader ones on ALLFED and kind of food resilience work in general. So I think the graph you showed last about getting up to 20% of global food production is pretty impressive as a result. And I was wondering what the key uncertainties in that number are, and if it turned out to be much harder, what aspects of the thing do you think would have gone wrong?
Well, one of our big assumptions was the budget for $450 billion. So, and that's taking all of the industry, which if we had different alternative foods would obviously be split up. So the 20% would be if we're just focusing on cellulosic sugar. So it might be decreased looking at multiple alternative foods if we had that same budget for those.
Yeah, okay, I guess that links to the other question I was going to ask, which was, how does this fit into the other proposals for food scaling up that you guys talk about? So, be it the methane or what was the other one you mentioned? Single-cell protein.
Yeah, single-cell protein.
Yeah.
Or, for example, you maybe have seen there's a poster upstairs about seaweed, which hasn't been in the ideas back then, 2014, which now seems very promising. So how does it fit in? Obviously, we don't want to eat only sugar, so that's not a healthy diet. We would survive like that probably for weeks, but that's nothing we want to approach for a long time. So we would be scaling up different kinds of alternative food sources. That's why we are doing these more detailed analysis to see how much, bang for a buck you actually get, how many calories or what kind of nutrients you can produce. And the key question being about the time, and seeing that we are able to feed 20% of the global food demand in just 1 year is very promising. It might decline after that we take the cellulosic sugar to be a smaller part of our daily diet. That could definitely be. There's a project going on right now. We are mapping how you would need to balance out and what kind of ratio you would need to eat these alternative foods to have a healthy diet. But this is obviously showing a technical feasibility, and it's an encouraging message that we don't need to starve to death, and which I want to emphasize.
It's a very encouraging message, yeah. So what happens next with a research proposal like this? I guess there's a long way between putting together a paper like this and this sort of kind of global industrial effort. How do you envisage the kind of pathway from someone reading this paper or running more experiments related to this, or are there kind of pilot studies you'd envisage? Can you talk a bit about how, the path to impact from this?
Okay. Well, do you want to start, or
sure.
I will add.
We also have members of ALLFED looking at actually communicating with governments and organizations for how to be prepared, because while we're looking at the alternative food, the other part of ALLFED is actually being prepared to use these alternative foods and spreading around the information. So I would say that communication, and then also building up the research team to get more details into this, since we're kind of scoping it out, the different alternative foods. So just kind of furthering that along, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I maybe want to go a little bit more specific. There's, for example, one colleague called Zahil. He's looking very much into the financing and reinsurance of these scenarios. And, for example, global players or governments, they would ensure with another party that if a catastrophe hits, they have to deploy food at a certain maximum price to prevent people starting to hoard or fearing that they would have little amount of food. And therefore, the other parties are incentivized to invest into industry that could be scaled up quickly in case of a disaster, so they can pay out. And so they would be interested in having this knowledge, to be in contact with maybe biofuel refineries and have so long-lasting plants like this that would span over decades, and therefore getting long-term thinking and investment into these policies or actions. Yeah.
Cool. I think maybe there's time for one more before we go over to the audience.
And maybe just one more sentence, because you asked what are the next steps. This is already a very global, holistic approach. Mm-hmm. So we want to look at specifically where all the industries are, what kind of nations would need to trade to get a diverse diet, and where these areas are, and like where these facilities are actually located all around the globe, to get it basically to the national level.
I think we're 1 minute left, so one more from me. So I guess, so if we were unlucky enough as to suffer some sort of all-out nuclear war, I guess you mentioned there's a lot of uncertainty over what exactly would transpire. I guess there's a range of outcomes from we get lucky and it turns out not to be that bad, there isn't a nuclear winter, or it's fairly mild. On the other hand, you could have a kind of really severe collapse of industry, infrastructure, institutions, and it seems like on either end, either of the kind of scenarios I mentioned, this sort of thing might be less useful. Either it's all fine, or these kind of industrial responses that rely on some semblance of kind of infrastructure and organization might be tricky. So I'm wondering about, how big is the space of worlds in which you see this being a kind of useful response?
Well, so again, there's a lot of variables that go into the nuclear war. In the targeted cities, might be some loss of infrastructure that we can no longer use. There has been a lot of movement towards, like in nuclear warfare, maybe targeting the enemy's nuclear armaments, so not necessarily bombing cities that would have the infrastructure, but their other nuclear weapons. So there's a chance that we would have more infrastructure there to use for use in cellulosic sugar. So again, there's a lot of assumptions, but it could be possible to feed more people.
To add on to that, and what kind of scenarios this would work? Well, in a full industry loss, for example, through a solar flare that destroys all our power grids, that would be quite hard to implement. These are ongoing research projects to see how we can repair or have spare power grids to work. But there's quite an amount of scenarios that also already could hit this century, where this information would be very valuable. For example, if we are looking at the smaller scale scenarios, like a 10% agriculture shortfall, which is already quite drastic. We haven't had that one in like 200 years, the last one being in 1816, where we had the Tambora eruption in Indonesia. That's a volcano that caused a big famine here in Europe. And today, a lot of the institutions in place, for example, the World Food Program, they are able to cope with like a 5% shock. But after that, they start to fail or have problems as well. So there's almost a guaranteed chance this century that we will face like a 10% shock. So there has been one UK study that estimates we will face around a 80% shock. A 10% shock with an 80% chance this century, just from extreme weather events alone. So you can imagine like a drought over Russia, a flood over Brazil, and forest fires in Canada, and then we could have these scenarios. So these are scenarios in which, when you know our next harvest got destroyed, globally speaking, where you want to start retrofitting biofuel industries, and it could already save millions to 100 millions of lives.
Great, thank you very much. I think that we are out of time, but thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.